Hi, I'm Valarie Regas, and my talk today is the shiny new Agile, we're Waterfall again. I'm going to start out, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, just so you know kind of who's talking to you. So I live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the southern U.S. I'm a mom. Actually, you can see a picture of my family on the bottom left. I've got 2 older kids, and I just had a baby. So yay, that's the upper right-hand corner. My sisters are my favorite people other than my children in the world. And I've done judo for 23 years. I make a lot of judo jokes. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt in judo, and it's my first love. And I actually shared a picture. If anyone needs a wedding officiated, I'm also an ordained minister of all random things. So needless to say, I didn't come to technology in a very direct route. I had a lot of other careers. I have 2 other main careers in my life, and came to DevOps in particular just a few years ago. It's kind of a winding path. And it's been an interesting transition, especially since I did do 5 years of hard time as a stay-at-home mom. That was the worst. Turns out if you're a stay-at-home mom, people expect you to be good at things like cooking and cleaning and being a mom. And that's not really my strong suit. So I find going to work every day and doing DevOps way easier. So yeah, just a little bit about me. I come to you with this kind of unique perspective, and I think this is why Agile has fascinated me, because it's been kind of a crash course the last few years learning about it. So yeah, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. First of all, we're going to talk about what is this Agile thing and why should you care? I mean, there's no point in learning about something if it's not pertinent. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to share some horror stories, some absolute horror stories. Now, I sent out an anonymous survey to several different communities of which I'm a member, got respondents from every different sort of niche within dev teams and business roles actually as well, that you can imagine, 4 countries so far. And the horror stories you're going to hear almost all come from this survey. People who are a year into their career, people who are 30 years into their career, sharing things that went wrong. Then we're going to take a little break, because that's how I roll. And then we're going to talk about how not to have your own horror stories moving forward. It's going to be very exciting. So thank you for joining me. Let's get into this. All right, what is Agile? What is the goal? Okay, so in theory, Waterfall stopped being a thing before I even got into tech. I'm told that back in the Stone Age, Waterfall development was the thing. And so when I got my current role, I had to kind of catch up on learning Agile methodology and blending into my team. And the best metaphor I've read for Waterfall versus Agile actually was a JFrog blog I saw not long ago comparing Waterfall to a rocket launch. So if you're doing a rocket launch, that is one big major event, and you're going to have to plan it out very linearly, step by step. Things happen sequentially. Really, really poorly. Whereas Agile is more like a modern airline industry, right? They're having launches repeatedly all day, every day, and they're constantly reevaluating. How did that flight go? What do we need to change? What could be better? So this is, for me, a really good way of understanding why do we even care about this Agile methodology thing. It's because with software, smaller change is better, obviously. There's a manifesto out there that I really liked, and I'll be sharing some links at the end of the presentation. But when you break down how to get to this sort of Agile mindset and develop in this way, there were a few points made that really resonated with me. So the first is going to be Agile is going to value individuals and interactions, people, over the process and the tools. What does that mean? I mean, in a really basic way, it means that people matter more than work. People matter more than arbitrary process for the sake of process, right? We're going to value working software over comprehensive documentation. Now, obviously, documentation matters, but the point here is to focus on the product. That matters above all else. Customer collaboration above contract negotiation. Now, this is a big one. And I think this also speaks to valuing human beings more than processes or money or any other thing. Obviously, we want money. Money is cool. It makes the world go round. It doesn't buy happiness, but it buys things that make me happy. However, your customers are human beings. And within Agile, you always want to work with them and build with them and create with them and have a relationship, not just sign on the dotted line, we'll give you some software, you give us some money. And then responding to change, mattering more than following a plan. This is, I think, and it's in the name, the word agile. We think about agility, we think about gymnasts sprinting about blankly. Responding to change is one of the biggest, most important sort of end results of actually practicing Agile methodology. So what does all this have to do with DevOps? Like, why are we talking about Agile at DevOps conference? Well, what are the goals? I mean, when we talk about, DevOps isn't like beer. You can't go to the store and pick up a 6-pack of DevOps, right? It's a culture. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking about the process. So what are those goals? What are you trying to get to there? Well, we're trying to get to a point of CI/CD. Right? We want to constantly be integrating and delivering good, clean, tested, lovely code, right? That's important. Agile methodology should lend itself to making this a reality. We want to be able to release our code. It's so clean, it's so thoroughly tested, everything's automated. We should be able to release new code at 4:45 on a Friday. We're not going to because we're not crazy people, but we could. That's a goal within DevOps. Again, with Agile methodology, one of the things you're looking at doing is cutting risk and being more efficient and making smaller increments of change. And as we all know, the smaller the change, the easier to control. The bigger the change, the more likely you're going to lose your weekend. And then automating all the things, right? DevOps isn't a set of tools. It is definitely a culture and a frame of mind. However, the tools help. So automating and simplifying processes through automation is a big goal, which fits in very nicely with Agile methodology in that with Agile, you're wanting to sort of restrict huge numbers of processes that don't necessarily help you and make things as simple as possible. So how can we if our teams are truly agile or if we're actually waterfall? Well, spoiler alert, I can't tell you if your team is or is not doing the best it can possibly be doing. You know that. So if you're in a leadership position, we're going to go through and talk about some things. You're in a great position to sort of critically analyze your team and your processes and how things are going. And if you're not in a leadership position yet, take notes and go to leadership and say, hey, I went to this talk and I've got some cool ideas that might be able to help us moving forward, be a value add. Well, how are we going to do that for all of your different teams? Well, one, I'm going to give you some very specific metrics against which to measure your teams, right? So today we're going to just talk about all of them, and you can use those metrics to really analyze. But moving forward, you're going to constantly reevaluate. It is important that no matter how good something is, no matter how well something works, it can always be better, right? So constant reevaluation and determining, are we really there? That is key. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and we're going to talk about what happens when the answers are no to these questions. And again, most of this comes from this anonymous survey. Got some really great horror stories from there. So the first question I'm going to ask you about your team is, has your team achieved continuous delivery of good software? Now, this is kind of lobbing a softball, as it turns out, because this is a huge question. Like it's really hard to specify, and only you know the answer for your team. But 76% of respondents mentioned that either they're not at a CI/CD place, or they don't think that their product is as clean as it could be, or it's not as good as it should be. It's a lot of people, a lot of people. There were some really fun horror stories shared. one of my favorites actually had to do with a gentleman wrote a new API that was supposed to integrate with all their existing APIs. And instead of starting small, one change at a time, he just kind of, he said that he just knew he could do it. So he just wrote this huge thing that had so many moving pieces and so much to interact with. And come to find out, he ended up borking their entire development environment for like a week because long story short, it didn't work with this custom Docker image that the company used for all of their deployments. It just didn't work. These sorts of huge changes are, so many of the respondents brought up huge changes, breaking everything. So yeah, I definitely want to take a step back and look at your team. And first of all, are we making good software, like really good software? And if we are we releasing constantly? Are we updating constantly in small, tiny increments of change? Does your team welcome changes and requirements even late in the development process? This is a big one. My favorite horror story from this sort of realm came from the world of consultancy. The person who shared this said that basically they were working for a client, and because they had sort of a hybrid on-prem cloud situation for deployments, and they had one person who had access to each environment. They had one person in charge of configuration management. They had one other person doing all of QA. Because there were so many people, and those people had very specific permissions, and their deployment process basically took 2 days anytime they had to push out new code. 2 days, because they had to get everyone in the same place at the same time. It was usually the middle of the night because it almost always broke. Because what would happen is if they had to push like a little hot fix, just a little urgent fix, business people in the business team would say, hey, this deployment process takes so long while you're in there, while the hood's open, just let's go ahead and add some more code. And what should have been a very small change would start piling up because people would say, oh man, I've got to get this code out right now because it's going to take weeks to do it otherwise, because this, magical convergence of these people doesn't happen. And they said that almost always those changes had to be rolled back. It took days to iron everything out. It was just a nightmare. If you have those sorts of lengthy processes, you necessarily can't welcome change. You can't shift. You can't be agile if it's taking that kind of time for things to happen. Actually, I had, now this was not from the survey. This was a gentleman I actually know shared a story where basically his team had gone through a fairly lengthy, months-long development process, right? So lots of man hours, lots of money, lots of time. And they needed from IT, this server with 8 gigabytes. And basically IT shows up and is like, oh, you get two. Well, there's no shifting at this point. You've now dedicated months of your life to something that's not going to happen because your IT guys aren't giving you the resources you need. Look at your processes. Look at those sorts of things and really ask yourself, can you shift? Because 47% of people responded with something along the lines of, no, we have too many processes. We can't. And that's kind of hard. That's kind of sad. Do your business and development teams work together? Now, obviously, you might work in the same building, but do you really work together? There was sort of a theme amongst respondents, especially when I tried to follow up with some people and kind of dig. One of the horror stories that came out the most was basically salespeople and business people promising to the customers that were just never going to happen, that the dev team just couldn't make work. It was not going to happen. Promised a customer. Very few people actually mentioned having anyone that's not in their dev team for any reason or amount of time. And that was kind of sad to me. It's almost like if business and dev don't know what the other is doing, right? How can they speak knowledgeably to what the other team is capable of doing? So there were lots of horror stories about salespeople promising things that were just not realistic. Okay, so this is actually a really big chunk. These two questions are huge when you really look at the implications. Is your team built around motivated people, and are those people given the tools they need to do their we'll talk about the tools first, actually, because that should be an easy one. Definitely had a horror story that basically in the first 2 months of his employment with a new employer, he went through 5 laptops because they kept breaking. Like the machines weren't good. They weren't capable of helping him do his job. And think about 2 months worth of someone's salary and benefits just wasted, honestly, because he wasn't a productive resource without the right tools. But taking a step back to, is your team built around people? Okay, so here's the thing. If you are a leader, ask and trust the people that you lead. And if you don't, why are they your employees? If you're an employee, you feel trusted by your leadership. And if not, why are they your leadership? Why are you working there? Trust is huge on teams with teamwork in general. One horror story about a gentleman not being trusted by his employer is basically he knew how to solve a problem. There was a backlog issue, and he said he just knew how to do it. It was very similar to something he'd seen before, and he wasn't allowed to because basically that ticket wasn't considered in scope, and their process for pulling a ticket out of the backlog was so lengthy and involved. He just wasn't fix a problem that he had time to fix. He knew how to fix. That speaks to no trust. That is a problem. Most people don't feel motivated to work hard for you. Companies the fanciest things from day one, but do everything possible to not these horror stories out there where people just don't have the trust to know what to do and the tools to actually get the thing done. So this one changed. So I started writing before the pandemic. So this slide would have been a lot different, but we live in this new world. Is your team communicating face to face? Now, I'm gonna tell you, stories about lack of face-to-face communication are plenty, and not from my survey, but you go to the internet and type things like Zoom mishap in the Google, you're just going to have a fun time. It's important to communicate face-to-face. We all use email tools like Slack, Telegram, Messenger. We use these written formats to communicate with our teammates, and that's all well and good. There's a place for it. However, you cannot get above, people's emotions in the absence of face-to-face communication. Lots of horror stories about miscommunications, but I'll share one of mine. I had a coworker when I asked a very specific question about how something in GitLab was configured. I mean, a very detailed question. He sent me a link on Intro to Git for absolute beginners. And I was just like, really? Okay, so I closed my machine because I know better than to respond when I'm angry. And I went for a walk. I came back, and I work really hard to always assume positive intent when I'm reading someone's. But this one kind of got me. So I just wrote, hey, I'm not sure if you meant to be this way or if you're aware of it. But when I read what you wrote, here's the message that you think I'm an idiot. Okay. And I really hope you didn't mean that. And so we had to have a chat and we worked it out and all of, but because of that miscommunication, we both lost out on work time and we both just were kind of agitated. Reason. Just turn the camera on. It's important. Also, I don't know how many people out there are like me, but I'm kind of digging my new work attire. I'm kind of liking this new world where people are only seeing from like here up. Big fan. About your teams again. Do your processes lead to sustainable development? Here it is. The majority said no. Now, most of those stories aired on one side of the spectrum. I will tell you the other side of the spectrum first. So one gentleman shared that basically for every sprint, the last day or two, sometimes even 3, because of how sprints were organized and the restrictions and rules about pulling tickets off backlog and scope mattering so much, his last 1 to 3 days of every sprint were spent pretty much doing nothing. He was pretty much at the office taking up space because he did all of his work efficiently and quick, and he just was done with what he'd been assigned for that sprint. That's not sustainable. I mean, you can if your employee's kind of like a gimme day, but that pace is too slow for that teammate's ability to work. But the overwhelming majority of people who said no, our rate is not sustainable, was on the other end of that spectrum. Late nights, coming home from work, having dinner, and then immediately back on the laptop almost every night. People in their office on Sunday trying to knock things out consistently. So obviously deadlines happen. Obviously, sometimes you're going to be hours. It's the nature of what we do. That's cool. It should not be the norm. Who are overworked and headed towards burnout or not already there, at how many people felt like it just their pace of development was just not sustainable. Oh, now this is a hard one.
Sorry for interrupting you. Sounds like our internet connection also not sustainable a bit. And could you please switch off your camera to save us some bandwidth? Okay, should be better. Let's continue, but with slides. It's happened sometimes because, like, you know, internet is on huge demand nowadays, and yeah, we have slides, so we have your voice. Let's continue.
Excellent. So this one, are all of your processes necessary? So this is a big one. If you Google the Agile methodology, just that phrase or framework, Agile methodology framework, you're going to get a lot of different ways to do Agile, right? It's not one size fits all. And some of these frameworks adhere so strictly to, this list of processes being really important. They're not. Spoiler alert. We actually, one of my favorite horror stories was a small team. The guy said that they spent 2 full days. He did not actually specify how big his team was. He just said a small team. So however many people sat in a room for 2 full days at the beginning of the sprint, writing out tickets because they had such a structured and rigid list of requirements for ticket writing. And on day 3, when that team attacked those tickets, it took about 1 hour for all of them to be done. Now, there's a lot to be said for detailed ticket writing, but that sounds like crazy pants to me. That's a lot of process around a very short actual working event. However, the vast majority of respondents, while there were a couple of good ones along those lines, when asked about processes and if everything was necessary, meetings came up constantly. We're talking people that literally have an average of 3 to 4 hours of meetings per day. I'm not sure when you're supposed to actually do your job if you're in meetings that many hours a day, but that was a constant complaint. All right, so this is a big one. Is your tested, integrated, automated, and is your team's development test driven? Lots of horror stories. Basically, one team, I really liked them. They had a QA person, like a dedicated full-time, and when he left the team, they basically just didn't test anymore. And as long as things worked in dev, they just got pushed through. And you can imagine how how that went for that team. So yeah, testing is so important. There were several horror stories around newer developers genuinely not understanding how to write tests before they code because they're under a deadline from day one in their first role, and no one teaches them how to do that. 61% said not enough testing, or it wasn't automated, or something barring them from having this thoroughly tested code. And again, it's not agile. It's Waterfall. If you're not testing enough, you are not agile, because guess what? You're not actually delivering good software. That's a problem. All right, planning. Is your planning just enough? Is it adaptive and continuous? Okay, so let's talk about all the different, like, this is a program board. The SAFE framework for Agile is really involved. But imagine, some of the horror stories that came through were basically just way too much planning. So you've got ticket tracking, plus a shared Trello board, plus GitHub issues, plus a master whiteboard in the office, plus a replica of that whiteboard somewhere online, plus team drive folders and documents, plus all the Atlassian products, plus. Also, check your email 1,000 times a day because stuff's coming in there too. Yeah, some of the planning. Okay, I have kids. I understand that sometimes 1 hour of planning can save me a day of headache and heartache when I take them out of the house. If I take that 1 hour to pack up extra clothes because they will inevitably vomit on me or do something repugnant, and they always do it if I don't have extra clothes. I do think planning is important, but you got to look at your team. For all days with the kids, an hour is enough. What's enough for your team? Are you doing too much? Okay, this one, do your devs only dev. Are the people on your team doing more than, quote, their job? Now, few horror stories where people actually said, that's not my job, to a teammate. I don't understand that sentence. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. You're on a team. It doesn't work this way. Like, you have to be willing to step outside of that comfort zone. There were all sorts of horror stories about, basically, because everyone on the team was sort of an expert in one area, the team would have to, like, synthetically demand level and limit what they were able to promise and accomplish because of work bottlenecks, because only certain people did certain things. That's intense, man. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. You just learn new things, and that's half the fun of being alive, right? That's why we're here, is to learn. So yeah, lots of horror stories around that. And this one, do you regularly analyze how your team is doing and make changes? This one, the same person, or rather 100 different people could have written the exact same horror story. It basically boiled down to, oh yeah, I saw problems with my team. I saw things going wrong. I worship and suggested change, and nothing changed. There's this, I don't understand the concept of critically analyzing any area of your life or work, seeing that there is a problem and something has to change, and then not doing anything towards change. It's like if I look in the mirror and say, man, I've still got some extra weight since I had the baby. I should join the gym and go work out. And then I don't. Like, that's not going to change anything. As it turns out, you're still going to have problems. The number of horror stories where people just felt like their leadership wasn't listening or changing things that had been pointed out that were wrong. They weren't regularly analyzing and then actually changing things. That was a fairly consistent theme. And so I'm going to leave you on that one, especially if you're a leader. Know that not listening to the team members that you have and not trusting them is someone's horror story. So having said that, now that we've gone through all sorts of people's mistakes and things that can go wrong. We are going to take a little bit of a break. And I don't know if that 15 minutes is actually accurate, Mikhail, if you want to weigh in on that. But when we come back, we're going to talk about how not to have these horror stories anymore.
Yeah, let's spend like 7 minutes for this break, and we'll spend another 7 minutes at the end.
Excellent.
Okay.
I'm going to go check Telegram.
We have a couple of very
party going on in Telegram.
Yeah, we have already a couple of good questions, so at least 2. While we have a break, let me ask them, if you don't mind. First one was, what the details of your research, which you used in the thesis? How many companies you took in, field of work, big or small, government, commercial? So basically, maybe you can highlight some details about these questionnaires.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So just to be clear, my research was not funded. When I write talks, anyone who writes a talk has 2 options. You can present your point of view and your experience and your perspective as an island, or you can ask other people. I always value the approach of asking as many different people as possible for their input and perspective, because we all have different backgrounds. We all see the world different ways. We all work in these different places. And the more different voices you have, the more interesting the conversation, as far as I'm concerned. So this, I love this question because it makes me sound like a really cool scientist. I'm not. I do have a degree in psychology, and I did take some research methodology classes, but form and just asked questions about different people's work experiences. I shared it with all of my team and asked them to please send it to all of their former coworkers. I shared it on LinkedIn, I shared it on Twitter, and it was anonymous. I didn't want to know where people worked. I didn't want to know anything that would make them uncomfortable being honest. It's I think there's always a gamble when you speak at a conference and say, yes, and I work for this company and they're garbage. Let me tell you why. Well, that's a fast way to get fired. So I purposefully did not ask people where they worked. I don't know. I know that I was lucky. I got a few hundred responses. I was, thankful for the number of people in my community that shared it with their friends and their friends and their friends and helped me out. But yeah, that's how I did it. I just can't imagine it would be very fun to only have one perspective. So if you ever follow me on Twitter, you will inevitably get a form shared at some point where I'm like, hey, I'm writing a talk and I would like your point of view.
And yeah, you should follow Valarie on Twitter for sure.
Yep.
Oh, this is so fun reading what I'm able to read of the Telegram.
Okay, so I'll probably ask the other question. It was this great question by Alexei. So, Alexei says the DevOps culture is not a new thing. And he says that he's read the Phoenix project around 2014. And Agile is, of course, even older. And, he says he hears the same words all over again. If your release process takes days, then you're not agile, you can't embrace change, etc., etc. So the question is, why do things stay the same in 2020? If DevOps culture and Agile are such a silver bullet, why 6 years, actually much more than 6 years, is not enough? Yeah. And why doesn't everyone who's not Agile basically die out?
Again, why do people stay in marriages that make them miserable? Why do people know they need to go to the gym and never go to the gym? Why do people pay their rent late when they knew for a week they needed to pay it, but then they got lazy? People become set in their ways. People are very good, I think, at finding problems and not so good at changing. Sometimes there's comfort in doing something that is just familiar, even if it's not necessarily the best thing. Some people are threatened by change. Some people, I think, get so micro-focused on doing the right thing, so they want to follow a framework to the letter instead of I don't know, I hate to use the phrase common sense because that's a matter of perspective, but instead of like just thinking, do I need all of these things? And they get bogged down and they don't really realize they're in it until they're in it. I don't think I know of anyone ever that, basically says, you know what, we're purposefully not going to be agile. Forget that. That's this trendy new thing and I'm not interested. I think most people, even teams that consider themselves agile, even if you point out to them places where they're not, because they consider themselves agile, it just, they're done. They don't feel like they need to analyze anymore or change anything. It's basically working. We're basically doing okay, right? I mean, things could be better, but meh.
Yeah, I think what Alexei is basically speaking about, Agile actually has been around since the 80s, and DevOps is also already 10 years old. And we've all seen those consultants who they say Agile and DevOps are good for the business. Moreover, they try to scare organizations into doing Agile and DevOps, saying that everybody is doing Agile and DevOps, so you won't survive if you don't do Agile. But the truth is, we see so many folks still not really doing Agile, and they still survive. They still have business.
It's true.
Well,
it's true.
People paying money sometimes also without thinking, should I pay for it? And on this note, I would.
Are you maybe saying that people are stupid? You wouldn't be saying that, no?
I did not say it explicitly. I will ask next question, but I know that you have answer on it on next slide. So, like, what we will do with it? How to make it better? And I suggest just move to the second part of presentation.
Yeah. So, quick reminder: we talked about Agile. We talked about what it is, why you should care. I shared horror stories. Now we've had a break. Let's go over how not to have as many horror stories of your own. I hope I never get horror stories from y'all. All right. So on the good software, again, this was a huge question. There's so many moving parts to this question. So we're gonna gloss over the answer because the answer is actually gonna come from all of the different answers. But two really points to continuously delivering good software: you're going to make the smallest increments of change possible at all times and figure out how to let your developers be test-driven. So here it is. The people who reported that they don't do test-driven development because of various reasons, the biggest reason was time. They're under so much pressure to release a new feature. They're under these crazy deadlines, and testing is the first thing to go. As a leader, if your developers don't have time to write tests, figure out how to get them more time, figure out how to get more resources so the work is spread out differently, figure out what works for y'all so that you can actually practice test-driven development. And then smaller changes. We're going to say that like 12 more times. So, smallest possible changes, test-driven development, that's it. And I say that that's it. It's like, just go climb Everest real fast. It's a lot, but it is that simple. On welcoming changes and requirements late in the development process, man, this can be a really hard one. And there were some actually really good suggestions that came from the respondents to the survey. So constant feedback. This is a big one. The business people who work with your customers and your users and are trying to figure out, what the requirements are for a new feature or what needs to happen. I'm very lucky. A lot of the examples of good things to do I'm going to share come from my personal work experience. I've been so blessed to be at a great company these last few years with a great team. We have representatives from product, business, marketing, just all of these different people on cross-functional teams. And our product people, our business people, the ones who actually work with our customers, have access to our development environment. And they are in there looking at features as they're developed, which is nice because instead of showing them months worth of work, that may or may not be what they actually envisioned, they're seeing it in real time, and they're able to constantly, in our daily stand-ups, because they're on cross-functional teams, business is able to say, hey, this isn't moving in the direction the customer would have preferred. Can we maybe shift? That's awesome for making changes, because now we're making a change earlier and earlier in that process when it's easier to shift. Again, we're going to say it a million times. You're going to get so sick of me. Smallest possible changes. It's so hard because you just want to create all the cool software right now, this minute. I just want to make stuff now. Smaller changes. And then scope creep. Definitely, the more you pile on and promise and plan, the more tied you are to that plan. It's much more difficult to shift if you've planned 10 to 20 weeks worth of sprints. I mean, it's really difficult to be agile and to actually shift. I kind of touched on business and development teams working together. I got to tell you, I cannot say enough good about our cross-functional teams. We have, people from all the different, we've got front end, back end, design, product. Our teams are blended from the different sort of entities. And this constant feedback loop makes it really easy to be agile and to just shift on a moment's notice. Daily interaction. Cannot overemphasize the importance of, I don't care if it's a stand-up or a Slack channel that's actually active, but staying abreast of what everyone's doing and knowing who's touching what, and if you have a problem, where to go, and who's doing something that might help you, hugely beneficial as far as making changes quickly because they're small and you're getting that constant feedback. I cannot recommend involving your business people and your dev teams enough. The product people add such a wonderful perspective and a different set of eyes, and they're great. All right, this one, we're going to talk about building your teams around motivated people. Well, first of all, code owners, encouraging, your motivated, exciting, or rather excited people, the people who are passionate about what they're creating as code owners, and having them, obviously that doesn't mean they need to write all the code for a feature. They don't need to actually do that work, but having them sort of be like a feature champion or someone who shepherds those tickets, shepherds that work through and picks the right people to do it. Anytime someone is passionate about what they're doing, their work is going to be better, which is why I definitely recommend self-organizing teams. Trust people to choose the features that need to be worked on, that really excite them and really motivate them to want to be at work and to want to create, and organize around those passions. You're going to have better teams. Just in a really basic way, allowing people to take ownership of a project about which they're passionate and trusting them to know which teammates to help them do the work, and you will not believe the difference that passion makes in someone's job performance. It is incredible. It is incredible. Cannot say enough about self-organizing teams. All right, let's get real here, people. We're getting real. I'm going to be honest. I was kind of sad that you can't see my face because my video is off for this talk right now, because I'm giving you the eye and you don't know it because you can only hear my voice. Communicating with your team face to face matters so much, because in a really basic way, right now, you all can hear my voice, but you can't see my face. You can't see that I'm making all these expressions. You can't see my eyes. Especially in a pandemic where most of us are just at home all day, every day, avoiding other people. One, the human interaction that comes even from WebEx meetings or Zoom meetings or whatever, that little bit of human interaction, one, reminds us that we're not alone. It's a sense of connectedness. But two, it reminds us that our coworkers are real people. You ever see people on the internet, they're having a written conversation and they start name calling and attacking each other and saying horrific things that you wouldn't say to a human being on the street, but somehow the internet makes them feel anonymous and no one's going to know. And they forget that the people reading it are human beings. after a while, we need that. We need to remember that our coworkers are also human beings. They're our friends. They're our teammates. They're the people that we spend most of our waking hours with. I see my coworkers more than I see my kids pre-pandemic. It's a thing. And I know, like we all have the COVID mullet and we're all hairy and gross. And most of us are wearing like I like to call them my Eton pants, like the elastic waist Eton pants, the ones. No one cares what you look like, really, really. Most people are so focused on their own appearance. They're not really looking at anything wrong with you. They just want to see your face and communicate and be connected. So I beg of you, turn on the camera, get on a call with your teammates every day. All right, sustainable development. How are we going to discourage a pace that's not sustainable? So too slow is sort of an easy fix, right? If sustainable pace is our goal, if you're not giving people enough work to do, that's a pretty easy one. Trust them to take on extra tasks. Right? Make your processes such that it's easy. So one of the horror stories, if you'll remember, was the gentleman who just wanted to do work and wasn't allowed to because of this process. Create some flexibility within your processes so that people can be trusted to identify that work needs to be done, see it, know how to do it, and do it, right? But again, most people fell into working too much. So how are we going to, prevent this burnout? Well, one, we're not going to encourage it. So as leadership, if you have employees who are consistently working round the clock, deadline or not, they're just always frazzled. Find out why. Some people are workaholics. Some people just work all the time, and that's their choice. I would go as far as to say, please don't praise them for it because they are going to burn out. Don't reward that level of self-neglect, right? Because again, if your employees, people are a resource, right? If an employee is not taking care of themselves, they're abusing one of your work resources, right? But more often than not, I think you'll find that people work that way because they feel like they have to. Well, why? Are there too many deadlines? Is there too much work with too few people to do it? Why do they feel like they have to keep up that pace? And then take steps to make it so that they don't. And sometimes that means cutting back on the scope of sprints for a while. Sometimes that means hiring a new person and divvying up some more work. Cool. I don't know what's going to work for your team, but I do know that people who work like that, even the ones who make it a year or two at that kind of pace or many years at that kind of pace, they burn out hard. And you're going to lose them if you allow them to burn themselves out like that. All right. Are all of your processes necessary? Well, definitely we talked about meetings. We want to talk about limiting meetings, but that's easier said than done, right? Because some meetings just really do need to happen. They really can't be emails. Cool. So what does this look like? For some companies, for some teams, it's going to look like no one's allowed to schedule meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now, please, for the love of God, do not counterbalance that by scheduling nothing but meetings all day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Limiting meetings means to actually limit them, not just rearrange them. For some teams, it's going to look like meetings may only take place between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. And, everyone gets guaranteed hours where there aren't meetings every day. Maybe that will work for your team. But more important, I think, than even the number of hours people spend in meetings is having a clear agenda for every meeting. What does that look like? How many times have you sat in a meeting that halfway through you realized you've now wasted half an hour of your life and you don't even really need to be here? This isn't pertinent to you. It's not what you thought it was. Within your meetings, when you do the invite, have a very clear and specific agenda listed, and then do whatever it takes to stick to that agenda, right? So if something tangentially gets brought up, parking lot it, write it down. That's for another meeting. Move on. Stay on your agenda. And I would go so far as to say, okay, for this meeting, we're going to discuss topic A for 5 minutes, B gets 10, C gets 5, 20-minute meeting, we're done. and have a timer going on your phone or something. Like, really respect people's time, and things that are unresolved at the end need to go to the next meeting or need to be resolved via email or Slack or something else. Because come on now, I mean, when your day is half meetings, that's so hard to get any work done. I mean, really, people like me, I'm fairly ADD. It takes me 15, 20 minutes just to get focused when I sit down. I mean, I have to work really hard just to get into that zone. And, if we're constantly being popped out of that concentrating place for meetings, how much actual work are we getting done, even if we're at the office all day? It's not the best use of time always. Meetings need to happen. They are important. There's always going to be another meeting, but you can limit them. You can make them more known. You can have a clear agenda so people know if they actually need to be there or not. And that will help. That will go a long way towards limiting some of those processes. All right, testing. This is so hard, especially I think in startup culture where you're under huge pressure to just deliver, constantly be delivering more and more features more quickly with fewer resources. And okay, testing always seems to go first. It has to happen. I would say that if you're leadership, go to your juniors and ask them if they know how to really practice test-driven development, if they know how to write a test before the code, if they know how to refactor working code and clean it up and make it better. And maybe you dedicate for a few months a little bit of time each week, just a couple hours maybe, to teaching them this process. It doesn't have to be fixed overnight. Most of the problems that you'll see that you have as a team aren't going to be fixed overnight. This is definitely one where some learning has to happen. It's going to take time to get your testing, automated into your pipeline. But taking actual steps towards having everything, I mean, just getting your developers where they have time to go through this simple process and making sure that features and deadlines are such that they actually can do this and not just think about it and think, man, I wish I had time, but it works on my machine. It works in dev. Cool. It's good. Ship it. It's such a gift because there are a few feelings in the world, from my estimation, there are a few feelings as beautiful as when you write something that is clean and beautiful and works. And like, I don't know, just the high that I get from working software. Test-driven development is probably the best way to get that next fix, that next shot of working software. All right, on planning. One, talking about smaller increments of change, planning for less. If you are trying to plan 10, 20, 30 weeks out, that's a lot. I mean, and I think that there's something to be said for having that long-term vision. But when I use the word plan in this context, I'm talking about very specific, detailed plans. So maybe you have a specific and detailed plan for 1 or 2 sprints. And then for the 2 sprints after that, a very loose, rough, based on what's happening right now plan. And then out from that, even looser, because in theory, you'll be adapting to change over those next few sprints. And that long-term plan is going to change, right? So trying to, plan so far out definitely is going to eat up your time with unnecessary planning. And then this is a big one. Remove redundancy. So if your planning involves collaboration tools, cool, those are great. There's all sorts of different ways to collaborate with your team and plan. Do you need 5 or 6? And I don't know the answer to that. That's for you to know. But go through and look for redundancy. Look for places where you're doing the exact same thing in multiple places, or things are duplicating. One of the things that's nice about like Jira is AHA and Jira integrate together. So if the product people want to use AHA and the devs want to use Jira, we don't have to update both. They update automatically. Things like that. Getting rid of redundant tools and making it so that people aren't given so much to keep up with through planning is necessarily going to cut some of the planning time and some of that time debt. Okay, so this is a big one. Now, I'm not suggesting that, you know, your UX designer cross-train on Python development. I'm not suggesting that people get like way far out of their you know, sort of comfort zone in what they do, but I work for this incredible team where anytime there's a new thing to do or learn, there's always people willing to say, I'll learn how to do that. A gentleman in my office actually shared with me an article, and again, there'll be a link at the end to all the different resources, but there's a great Medium article talking about T-shaped people, right? So we talked about during the horror story, if all of your people are I-shaped, they're experts in that one thing, their depth of knowledge is vast, but in that one thing, you're going to have to demand level, right? You're going to have to cut down on what you can promise because only certain people do certain things. Generalist, they're capable, they can do a lot, but they're not really great or expert in any of them. They're just sort of okay, and that's cool. Those are great because generalists help remove bottlenecks. But when you get a T-shaped person, so a person who's really, really good at that one thing, but branches out, that's where you really eliminate work bottlenecks and get more efficient. I cannot recommend enough having your team members, you know, absolutely cross-train on things that are at least tangentially associated with what they do. Because when we talk about a sustainable development pace, the more T-shaped teammates you have, the more people who can pick up tasks here and there that aren't necessarily what they were hired for, but it's similar and they're good at it. Cool. That is going to help with sustainable pace and is definitely going to help remove bottlenecks from your workflow. That is by far the best advice I have seen, and that Medium article was fantastic. Just going into why it matters to, of course, know your stuff, but know a little bit about everybody else's stuff if you can. And here we get to the meat and potatoes, as it were, it's a little American expression. Are you regularly analyzing and making changes? You know, on the break, we talked about people who stay in these non-functional teams and they do these processes that aren't agile and they're not moving towards DevOps. They're kind of stuck in this rut. Making change is so important and it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to say, I have to change. People, I think, get into a very specific mindset around work and around software in particular and how it should, well, it should be as best it can be. And reevaluating, having sprint reviews, having meetings where you're going over what went well, checking in with your teammates and finding out who's overworked, who's underworked, where your resources need more. That is going to enable you to make these small changes. Now, I want to make sure what you can't do is all the change at once, right? Just like, you know, you can't wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to change everything about my lifestyle and I'm going to do all the things right now. It doesn't work that way. What I would encourage everyone to do after this talk is go through these questions again about your team, really dig in and find the answers. And let's say you have 3 or 4 things where you see area for improvement. I would definitely recommend agile iteration over those changes. And by that, I mean, change one thing, address one thing. Analyze the change. Did it help? Did it help enough? Do we need to do more of that? Do we need to dial that back? Was that a good change for our team? Analyze and decide, are we going to carry that change forward or are we going to revert? Make that decision and then tackle item number 2. Okay, next item on the list. Let's make this change. This transformation of how your team develops doesn't happen overnight. And it shouldn't. This should be a never-ending process. You should always be looking for improvement. But in the short, hope that you can use these questions and have a better set of tools for analyzing how you're doing and making improvements. I can't wait to hear how well everyone's doing in a few months. If you'd like to connect with me, I'm always happy to connect. And at this point, if anyone mentions, I would love to have a chat.
No, Okay. So
Okay.
And Twitter is here, so don't forget to subscribe to it.
Yes, I can't wait to have you all help me write my next talk. It's very exciting.
Okay.
Hey, cool.
So, do we do more questions right now? Right? Let's
we're doing questions for next 10 minutes. And then we'll have discussions on for next whatever it will take. We are agile here, so.
Yeah, right. Actually, I had a question. So, if you don't have meetings, when do you have face-to-face time with your team members?
Well, so I would never go so far as to say never have meetings, obviously. That's why we talked about limiting meetings and changing the format so meetings are like medicine. As far as like you're going to have to take your medicine. It's going to happen. But you don't want to take medicine that's unnecessary. You want to take your buddy's pills. Same thing with meetings. They're not bad. You need them to have that face-to-face interaction. And there are some conversations that to try and put into Slack or something like that would just be prohibitive. You know, you'd have this tome, this never-ending chat thread. However, you can limit many. You can be really critical as to the content and the time frame. And you can make sure that people you invite know exactly what's going to be discussed so they can assess and you can trust them to know, do they need to be there? Is that something that's useful for them? Is that a good use of their time? So I hear what you're saying. Also, I am a firm believer, especially pandemic, we should be having social online stuff as much as, any of us can, but just an hour an hour a week of something, maybe grabbing coffee with or something and talking. Ooh, excuse me.
Actually, on a more serious note, I think the part about analyzing what you do actually requires having meetings. Like the best way to analyze stuff you do is to discuss it with your teammates.
Absolutely. I don't actually disagree. But again, instead of saying, hey, let's have a meeting and we'll make it 2 hours long and we'll just sort of analyze how we're doing. Instead of that, maybe send out a questionnaire ahead of time of what everyone's thinking. Do a little bit of pre-work and be fairly specific in what's going to be covered. People aren't on the spot thinking, oh, how are we doing? I haven't really given this much thought. You want people to show up, write something constructive, to already have their points, and then you're looking at a really smooth meeting that doesn't take as long and is productive.
Mike, you go with the question. My battery is about to die. I need to go bring my adapter. So.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool stuff. Okay, meetings is important. I like analogy with medicine. It's probably very precise. I will shift the gear a bit to another question. And Artyom saying that majority of advice is suitable for product companies in some way. And what about project company with legacy where we can be only like end-to-end test, how to be agile there? And I believe you have some insight into it.
I don't know. Honestly, the legacy stuff can be hard. I don't think you can be just 10% agile. I think you can do the best you can do. I think that the advice that I've given is some advice. Some of it will work for some people. Some of it will work for one person. Some of it will work for a lot of people. I think that it's absolutely possible to, when you're going into, sort of a project, to think in these terms, it's possible to do these things. And I would argue that any improvement is better than no improvement. So again, it's one of those things where I know a lot of people, they look around and they're overwhelmed because they don't know where.
Valarie?
To better development practices. You can't fix everything all at once. You can't do everything perfectly right now, this minute. But you can get up and clean out one drawer, as it were. You can make small changes, moving toward a better process. and get there over time. It doesn't have to just, there's not a set of advice that's just going to work for every single scenario across the board. Developers are like the snowflakes.
Yeah, makes sense. Recently on Twitter, some gentleman posted that like, do it as you're doing your dishes. Just make sure you clean up them sometime, and if you don't, like, do not complain that you're eating from dirty one.
I kind of love that, actually.
Yeah, just start using it as new quote for cleaning up the stuff. Okay, coming back to legacy and bloody enterprises, what probably will be your advice to identify, like, one question for the teammates to identify, is they really agile or they just faking it?
If you had to pick one measure, I would say definitely the team's ability to respond to change. And I choose that one because most of the other things we talked about are comprised by that. So what I mean by that is if you're on a team and you get a change in requirements and you have to adapt quickly, if you don't trust your teammates and have the tools you need to work, you're not going to be able to adapt. If you're working at an unsustainable pace, you're probably not going to be able to shift very easily. There's all sorts of things that kind of go into. I think that ability to change direction mid-sprint or abandon parts of a feature or change it in some way and sort of seamlessly do that, I think that is a really good way of taking your team's temperature. Look at, in the past, when we've had a change in requirements, were we able to quickly adapt to that? I don't know if I had to pick just one, but I mean, there's so many different metrics. There's so many different areas for misery in this process.
Okay. Anton, what your thought on it?
Well, one could argue that not every organization has to change all that much or all that frequently. Like when you're at a startup, that's your reality. Like your reality is changing all the time. You have new requirements, you have new opportunities, so you need to be able to react fast. But when you're on an enterprise, you have stuff more or less planned out for you.
No, I don't disagree. Which is why, again, I go back to everything I've shared can help someone. Not everything will help everyone. You're right. If you're on an established enterprise team and you're not getting any, sort of softballs thrown at you, you're not being asked hardly ever, the ability to be agile isn't as important. You might not need. I mean, people developed in a waterfall for freaking ever. Like, I mean, it was a thing because it worked and they were happy with it until they found a better way, right? So I would argue that if you're on a team with an established product that's not really changing hardly ever, and there's not this need to be agile, you just want to because you're told you have to, maybe you don't. I don't know. I think that there's always room for improvement, even if you're not headed towards a specific goal, if that makes sense. I mean, the goal is to have more time. The goal is to spend your nights and weekends with your family, not fixing broken code. And the goal is to not wake up every day and think, damn it, I have to go to work again today. This sucks. Like the real goals here are to like your life and enjoy it. So if your team doesn't need to necessarily change much or move into an agile direction, I think there's still always room to analyze, could we be doing things more efficiently or in a way that our employees have better lives? And that is always a reasonable goal, I think.
Well, it's quite nice goal to have. Happy developers, happy product, happy customers.
Happy customers, yeah, that's very important. What for me, one of the most important things in Agile is the getting constant feedback from your end users.
Oh yes,
because that was one of the largest problems with Waterfall. You only got feedback when it was too late.
Oh, yes. And I have to tell you, again, I talked about it before, but having non-developers mucking around in our development environment as though they're users has brought up so many little things. I mean, just having a non-developer look at what you're doing is always a good idea. And I kind of like having that extra layer between us and the user, because now we've got people who are intimately familiar with what our users are going to need and want and expect, but they have a little bit more knowledge about what's going on behind the scenes, and they can just look at everything with a very different perspective. I love having them fiddle around and, you know, bless them, like they basically act as QA because they find little bugs and things randomly. But we're finding it then. The user reports it 6 months later. So yay.
It's really cool.
Yeah, short affiliate groups.
Yeah, no, there's so much that goes into this process. Like, I think that was the most shocking part about getting into software for me, was I just didn't realize. You don't know what you don't know. I didn't realize how important the organizational parts really were. And I think that's why I was passionate to give this talk. Is it has just been a crash course the last 3 years in how different teams do this process differently. And it's been fascinating to me. So I hope that everyone listening, you know, feels like they have some ways that they can improve their team and move forward.
Thank you, Valarie. It looks like you guys actually came to the most interesting part of this talk today, and unfortunately the time on air is coming to the end for it, but I'm inviting everyone to continue in discussion zone. Спасибо, Валерий, спасибо, Майк и Антон. Я приглашаю всех проследовать вместе с ними для того, чтобы продолжить это чудесное обсуждение в дискуссионной зоне. Мне кажется, что получилось очень здорово, отличный разговор и прекрасные вопросы. Я думаю, что сейчас как раз самое время начать переключаться именно на дискуссионную зону.
Спасибо, Алексей.
Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Valorant.